And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's January the 19th day of this new year. Just 346 days remain to the year's over with, and we'll start a new year. And hopefully, things will be better than they have been in previous years. Holidays and observances, it's National Popcorn Day. Settle down with a bowl of this classic movie treat. Sample flavors from salty to spicy, or get creative with edible decorations like garland. Blue Monday, beat the bleak post-festive slump by setting or resetting resolutions and getting some exercise in the fresh air or watching an uplifting movie. Brew Monday, time to check in on a friend, neighbor, or family member over a cup of coffee or maybe a glass of tea. Elementary School Teacher Day. Elementary school teachers are superheroes, inspiring young minds to learn and grow and achieve their dreams. And some of the most patient folks to walk the planet. Brew a Potion Day. Gather ingredients from the garden and mix them in a cauldron with care. National Conservation Dog Day. Tenderness Toward Existence Day. Idaho Human Rights Day. Everybody deserves to be treated with respect and dignity and fairness. Upholding human rights means promoting equality and justice for all. National Tin Can Day. These cylindrical containers, unsung heroes of pantry organization. And like mini storage champs, keeping your food fresh and ready. World Quark Day. Delight your palate with unique dairy creations, blending tradition and innovation for a savory experience. Good Memory Day. Artist is Outlaw Day. Artists who make statements with their work challenge us to think and question and see the world in new and meaningful ways. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Champion for justice, led with unwavering determination. We just came out with a new book about his assassination not too long ago. Opened up a lot of questions that nobody'd ask. Wellington Anniversary Day, located in New Zealand's North Island. It's a vibrant city, boasts a stunning harbor, thriving art scene, and rich cultural heritage. Artes Mundi, Farmhouse Breakfast Week. Savoring a satisfying morning feast, relishing diverse flavors to energize and start the day on a high note. No Name Calling Week, Cancer Talk Week, National Fresh Squeezed Juice Week, vibrant elixirs of pressed fruits or vegetables, Hunt for Happiness Week, and Week of Prayer for Christian Unity. Christians across denominations come together in love and faith, setting aside differences to serve others and spread joy. Famous people born on this date: Dolly Parton, Edgar Allan Poe, Janis Joplin, Mac Miller, Katie Segal, Robert E. Lee, and Pete Buttigieg. Well, on that note, let's see what stories we have in the news, because there's always something going on. It's looks like 2026 is going to be even more diverse and exciting than 2025 was. Well, Harvard students expose systematic liberal bias, forcing conservatives to avoid certain classes. A student at Harvard said that systematic bias exists in the Ivy League institution after University President Alan Garber admitted the school went wrong by letting faculty push personal, political, and ideological viewpoints on students in the classroom. Tejas Bila, sophomore at Harvard, described the climate as one of the country's top-ranked schools, and how some students feel not welcome in certain departments and classes in an exclusive interview with Fox News. He said, "I do absolutely think it's a systemic issue. I'd say that President Garber's comments are really in line with what a lot of the reports and investigations into him found, which is that there's a lot of political issues. I remember when I came up through college. Teachers taught. They didn't indoctrinate. Well, Rob Schneider had some things to say. He said, "Go woke, go broke isn't a slogan. It's becoming Hollywood's reality." During the fifth season of Stranger Things, the character of Will Byers gathered his family and friends together, and he's got a good reason to do that. They did prepare for the final battle against Viona. Can't read my own handwriting. Terrifying, skinless monster with a penchant for mass murder and apocalyptic terrorism. But instead, he comes out as gay. That's perhaps the most anticlimactic moment in television since Pam woke up to reveal that the entire 10th season of Dallas had been a dream. In laborious and earnest tones, Will takes 4 minutes to tell everybody he just isn't into girls. Cue the inevitable chorus of solidarity from his friends and a warm group hug. Given this series is set in the 1980s, a more realistic approach would have been for them to storm out and declare Will to be more disgusting than... I guess that's Vecna. I haven't watched Stranger Things, so some of the more unique names occasionally escape me. Well, Nancy Pelosi just won't go away. She faces social media backlash over her behavior at the Bob Ware tribute event. The former House Speaker and self-proclaimed deadhead, Nancy Pelosi, drew swift online backlash after appearing at a tribute honoring Grateful Dead co-founder Bob Ware, with some social media users accusing her of bizarre behavior. Thousands gathered Saturday at San Francisco Civic Center to celebrate the life of Ware, who died earlier this month at age 78. And the event drew longtime deadheads, musicians, and political figures, including Pelosi. Pelosi, who was 85, delivered a speech about Ware and appeared to sing and sway along on stage as musician John Mayer performed the Grateful Dead classic Ripple. During portions of her remarks, she appeared to stumble over her words while reflecting on Ware's legacy. She said Bobby Ware wasn't just a musician, a magician as well. He was a force of nature. Pelosi also used the moment to deliver a political message encouraging attendees to vote. She said, Ware gave me this sign, and I'll show it today because I said Bobby really loved democracy. He loved our country. Then she held up a sign reading, vote. You know what he wanted everybody to do? Go out and vote. I'm sure she worked long and hard to come up with that speech. Well, Meghan Markle, the one who thought she'd be queen, has got one condition for returning to the UK with Prince Harry. Harry is expected to be in Birmingham, England for the 1 year to go celebration marking the Invictus Games kickoff this summer. Hopes to have the Duchess of Sussex by his side, according to People magazine. No decision has been made on whether the mother of two will travel to the UK in July. Spokesman for Archewell told Fox News. These reports are utterly speculative. Kinsey Schofield, host of YouTube's Kinsey Schofield Unfiltered, told Fox News Digital that the Suits alum will only return to the UK if she's assured of receiving automatic armed security. Prince Harry has previously said he didn't feel safe bringing his wife and two children. That's Prince Archie, who's 6, and Princess Elizabeth, who's 4, without sufficient protection. And if Meghan were to travel to the UK on the current REVIC protocol, which requires 30 days' notice to assess threats levels, I'm confident both Harry and Meghan would receive armed security for an Invictus appearance, according to Schofield. And maybe she'd get it. I mean, the problem is, she thinks she's a star. She never got over the fact she hadn't been in anything in quite some time. Well, Iran's been accused of killing 16,500 in a sweeping genocide crackdown. Iranian protesters are facing their deadliest days yet as security forces unleash mass killings and executions in a sweeping crackdown, some have labeled genocide. According to the Sunday Times, a report compiled by doctors entrenched in a region and reviewed by the outlet estimate that security forces have killed at least 16,500 protesters and injured more than 330,000 other people. The report also described the violence as an utter slaughter, warning that the true toll may be even higher due to restricted access to hospitals and near total shutdown of communications. Well, California's hatred for capitalism is killing the goose that laid its golden egg. California didn't become the world's fifth largest economy by accident. Silicon Valley wasn't built by regulators. Hollywood didn't turn into a global storytelling powerhouse because of government planning. California was built by entrepreneurs and risk takers and innovators who believed in capitalism and the simple American ideology: if you work hard, take a risk, and build something valuable, you're going to be rewarded. That's why California's newly proposed billionaire tax should learn everybody who still believes capitalism works. That proposal isn't just another tax hike. It's a fundamental shift away from the very system that makes Americans prosperous as a nation. Under this plan, California is going to impose a one-time tax on residents with net worth over $1 billion, targeting wealth rather than income. And that includes unrealized gains, which means stock ownership, private company equity, and liquid assets that exist on paper. Wealth isn't always in checking accounts. Supporters call it fairness, but it's a tax on success before success is ever realized. Well, we'll see if that even comes to pass. Anti-ICE mob stormed Minnesota church over a pastor's alleged ties to immigration enforcement. Excuse me. Mob of anti-ICE agitators stormed a church Sunday in St. Paul, Minnesota, interrupting a worship service after protesters claimed a pastor inside was affiliated with immigration and customs enforcement. A video shows agitators chanting "Justice for Renee Good" inside the sanctuary at the city's church as the service began, raising concerns among law enforcement and religious leaders about protesters targeting houses of worship amid escalating anti-ICE demonstrations across the Twin Cities. In one video circulating online, agitators can be heard chanting "Justice for Renee Good" and "Who needs justice? We need justice" as they stood inside the church during the service. In another clip, the person filming says demonstrators positioned themselves in the middle of the sanctuary as the pastor was speaking. The person filming then described his disruption as a clandestine mission and claimed agitators had just learned one of the pastors at the church was connected to ICE. Well, this is going to keep going until we're going to have battles in the streets just like Iran does, which is a sad thing to see happen in this country. Well, Renee Good was summarily executed, according to the New York Times columnist, omitting key details. New York Times opinion piece omitted several details while describing the fatal shooting of Minnesota woman Renee Good by an immigration and customs enforcement officer after claiming Good was summarily executed. We become a country where a person can be summarily executed in public for protesting that paramilitary force, according to New York Times columnist M. Geeson on Sunday. According to Geeson had to say, after an ICE agent killed Renee Good by shooting her 3 times at point-blank range in Minnesota, January 7th, President Trump, Vice President Vance, and other federal officials said the shooting was justified as an act of self-defense. Now, according to the New York Times, the video shows otherwise and pointed to Good's ostensible affiliation with left-wing groups, apparently affirming that protest is now punishable by death in America. Well, billionaires are fleeing California within 7 days of a proposed wealth tax. A lot of them are moving to Miami. They're calling it the Miami migration. Real estate broker Julian Johnston says he's working directly with 3 billionaires moving from California to South Florida. As California's proposed billionaire tax begins gaining momentum late last year, some of the wealthiest people in the country didn't wait for ballots, lawmakers, or court challenges. They moved. Then a couple more flew to Miami, bought properties, and closed within 7 days. It was a sort of a tipping point. According to Johnston, who told Fox News Digital he's currently working with 3 billionaires to move them from California to South Florida, the urgency was driven by staggering potential losses. One client said, this could be like a $5 billion tax for me. So they're moving because of that. It's going to destroy the economy of California, but maybe Newsom and his cohorts will then be happy. A Texas couple labeled as a fake Chip and Joanna Gage in midst of $5 billion dream house renovation scam. Texas couples pleaded guilty to federal charges after prosecutors revealed they used social media to defraud dozens of homeowners out of nearly $5 million under the guise of custom homes and renovations. According to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Texas, Christopher and Raquel Judge, a married couple from Fort Worth, admitted to carrying out an elaborate scheme to deceive customers through their home renovation business. It's called Judge DFW LLC. That happened between August 2020 and January 2023. The pair billed themselves as a one-stop shop for custom architecture, interior design, and construction services, luring customers through social media to advertise their businesses while falsely claiming Christopher was an experienced architect. Apparently he was not. According to Lane Simmons, one of the judge's clients, they came to our house, pitched themselves as like this Chip and Joanna Gaines type of vibe. Federal prosecutors revealed the couple would present clients with below-market bids to secure building contracts before starting projects that were never finished and ultimately left victims with incomplete residences. We got something similar here in El Paso with roofing contractors. Well, Iran strikes could signal limits of Beijing-Moscow's power as the U.S. flexes its strength. President Trump is weighing whether to pull the trigger and launch strikes against Iran, a move that could potentially expose the weaknesses of both Russia and China, according to experts. Well, Russia and China have sought to make inroads in areas of Africa and Latin America, presenting themselves as partners for infrastructure and military equipment. Both Russia and China did not intervene to defend their ally Venezuela when the U.S. took action January 3rd to topple dictator Nicolas Maduro's regime. Potential strikes in Iran, coupled with the strikes in Venezuela to overthrow Maduro's regime, could drive home just how formidable the U.S. is and how near-peer adversaries like Beijing can't compete. That's according to experts. Well, we'll see how that comes about. Well, a California man has killed his wife and teen daughter in a murder-suicide, according to authorities. 52-year-old man killed his wife and teenage daughter before taking his own life in a shooting inside a Los Angeles County home Thursday morning. Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies responded about 8 in the morning to a report of an assault with a deadly weapon at a home in Lakewood. That's about 20 miles southeast of Los Angeles. A caller told the dispatchers her father had fired a gun at her and was lying unconscious nearby. When the deputies arrived, they met the caller, a 19-year-old woman standing outside her home. She wasn't injured and was taken in for questioning. Inside the house, deputies found a man laying on the floor in the den with a gunshot wound to his upper torso. He was identified as the father and the shooter, Hector Lionel Alfaro, 52 years old. Deputies then discovered Alfaro's 48-year-old wife, Roxana Rodriguez, in the bedroom, suffering from gunshot wounds to her torso. And in the second bedroom, deputies found the couple's 17-year-old daughter, Sienna Alfaro, had also been shot. All three are pronounced dead at the scene. Just the one daughter was a survivor. Well, people are asking why President Trump zeroed in on Greenland and why it matters. Greenland rarely draws global attention, but its ice melt and power inch closer. The world's largest island has become a strategic prize, one that caught President Trump's eye long before most Americans were paying attention. Semi-autonomous territory of Denmark, Greenland is home to a key U.S. military base and has become increasingly important in global security and trade as melting ice opens new shipping lanes and access to natural resources. That shift underscores the serious geopolitical calculation behind Trump's interest in the island's location, military value, and rapidly changing Arctic. Greenland is divided into 5 municipalities, with most of its roughly 56,000 residents living in small coastal towns, leaving the island's vast interior largely uninhabited. Put another way, Greenland has roughly one person for every 1,000 soccer fields of land. And its sparse population is largely a product of its geography. Roughly 80% of the island is covered by a sheet of ice formed about 3 million years ago, which leaves vast areas of its territory uninhabitable. But despite its small population, Greenland occupies a landmass comparable to global land area. It ranks among the world's largest territories. Scale that's drawn attention from countries such as the U.S., Russia, and China as competition in the Arctic intensifies. It's nearly the size of Alaska and Texas combined, so it is a large area. Well, Russia plots a major strike on Europe's largest nuclear plant's power lines, according to one source. He's preparing to target Europe's biggest nuclear power plant's power lines in a move that could unfold within days, according to a source familiar with the matter. Ukrainian officials said Moscow's plan was focused on high-voltage transmission infrastructure rather than direct strikes on nuclear reactors. But one source has since claimed that the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant's lines are Moscow's focus. In a statement released January 17th, the main director of intelligence for Ukraine's defense ministry has warned that Russia is weighing attacks on substations critical to nuclear power generation in order to force Ukraine to sign unacceptable nuclear demands as surrender demands to end the war. The aggressor state Russia is considering the option of attacking strategic facilities of our state's energy system. We're talking about electricity transmission substations that ensure the operation of Ukraine's nuclear power plants, which, of course, could cause quite a lot of problems for that country. Well, there's been studies about everything being done, and the world's most beautiful airport's been crowned, and it's right here in the U.S. Versailles, the International Architecture and Design Award, recently announced its selection as recognizing airport terminals it considers among the world's most beautiful. San Francisco's International Airport and Harvey Milk Terminal 1 received the top honor. That terminal opened in January 2024, according to San Francisco International Airport's website. The terminal features an exhibition honoring gay rights leader Harvey Milk, highlighting his political career and an impact on San Francisco through photographs and historical materials. Well, politics had to get involved in it somehow. And finally, Ilhan Omar had some things to say during impassioned remarks about ICE. She likened the U.S. government's conduct on immigration enforcement to that of countries like Somalia that she left, saying in impassioned remarks Friday she never thought she'd experience such conduct in the GDUS. She said, "I don't want to curse, but those of us who escape places like that, the one place where we thought we'd never experience it in the U.S., is certainly eye-opening," she said in a Democratic field hearing in St. Paul entitled "Kidnapped and Disappeared, Trump's Deadly Assault on Minnesota." Well, said she has profited from some of the missing money. She's a fine one to speak. Well, let us move to our topic for today. We've been talking about a lot of strange topics over the last few shows. And we've been talking about Area 51 and some of the truth about UFOs and secret aircraft and a lot of cover-ups. The year 1989 was a notable year in relation to Area 51. And for another reason of incredible proportions. A secret transfer is said to have occurred of an unknown number of alien bodies flown from Area 51 to the ultra-secret Utah-based Dugway Proving Ground. That's a claim of a man by the name of Mitchell Baxter, who worked on a tunneling program at Dugway in the early 1990s. According to Baxter, a colleague who also worked on the same program to expand current underground facilities at Dugway shared with Baxter what he knew. He'd worked on similar tunneling and excavation projects at Area 51. And while there wasn't a lot of data, Baxter's informant claimed that a number of alien corpses were transferred to Dugway from Area 51 for a very serious, disturbing reason. At some point in 1989, several technicians who were involved in the autopsy of a number of dead aliens that were recovered from a UFO crash somewhere near the fringes of Area 51 were killed by what was suspected of being a deadly, fast-acting alien virus. That goes along with some of the stories told John Lear at Area 51 in the early 70s. The lab in which the autopsies occurred was quickly locked down. The bodies were transferred to Dugway, which was in a far better position to handle matters relative to viruses and biological warfare. It ought to be noted that Dugway Proving Ground is just as secret and impenetrable as Area 51, although for what are largely very different reasons. The claims of the aliens' bodies held at the facility aside, of course, before we get to the matter of those alleged ETs at Dugway, which may well have been transferred there from Area 51, let's look at the history and the origins of this particular base. Largely the terrible events that went down at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, in December 7, 1941, dictated the necessity for the construction of a facility along the lines of the Dugway Proving Grounds. The attack, which demonstrated the horrific extent to which the United States was vulnerable to an out-of-the-blue assault from the skies, not only led the U.S. to enter the war, which had been raging since September 1939, but also led the U.S. to consider the possibility the country might not just be hit by another Pearl Harbor, possibly also attacks using chemical and biological weapons, issues the U.S. knew the Japanese were secretly working on. Now, Dugway is located about 85 miles southwest of Salt Lake City in Utah. The Dugway Proving Grounds is an Army facility for testing chemical and biological weapons. In fact, it's just as secret a place as Area 51. There implies there's other research going on there as well. It was a combined result of Pearl Harbor and a legitimate fear the Japanese might attack the U.S. with chemicals and deadly viruses that led then-President Franklin D. Roosevelt, February 6, 1942, to hand over no less than 126,000 acres of the Utah desert to the government, specifically to the military. Such was the need for a dedicated facility that was to be constructed in less than a week. Work began to construct a rudimentary facility that could specifically help to guard the country and the American people. Work actually officially began March 1st, 1942, and much of the early work was focused on determining how best to combat potential attacks of the chemical variety. Research into biological warfare largely began in 1943. 1945, even more land had been grabbed by the government. In addition, Utah's Wendover bombing range was handed over to Dugway, increasing its size even more. Then, when the hostilities with the Axis powers came to an end, the Dugway Proving Ground essentially joined forces with the Desert Chemical Depot, and the Dugway Desert Command came into being. During the 1950s, close to 300,000 more acres were added to the installation, making it a truly huge base, and one that, just like Area 51, was heavily guarded and largely shrouded in secrecy in terms of its work, which went forward in leaps and bounds. The change occurred in the late 60s, specifically in 1968. That was the year in which Fort Douglas-based Deseret Testing Center and the Dugway Proving Grounds came together. Then in 1973, another change occurred for the base. It was brought into TCOM, U.S. Army Test and Evaluation Command. Once more change occurred in 1999, when TCOM was reorganized as the Developmental Test Command. Today, the Dugway Proving Ground covers a massive 800,000 acres. Public Affairs Office of the Proving Ground states, in addition to chemical and biological defensive training, environmental characterizations, and remediation technology, testing the Dugway as the Defense Department's leader in testing battlefield smokes and obscurants. Testing now includes the further determining reliability and survivability of all types of chemical equipment in a chemical or biological environment. All this brings us to another aspect of the matter in which the alleged extraterrestrial bodies held at the Dugway Proving Ground from 1989 onward, having previously been reported held there and before then at Area 51. Second story revolves around Colonel George Waynebrainer, who was the chief of the Foreign Technology Division at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base's Air Material Command in Dayton, Ohio. He held that position for a period of 7 years during the 60s and 70s. On several occasions, he made brief allusions to the fact we have 5 aliens in Utah. These same allusions were made to close friends and family, although he wouldn't expand on the issue, which is why exactly might such bodies have been transferred to Dugway. Researcher Tony Bragalia offers a viable and logical explanation. He said that Dugway serves as the central source for information on biological material issues for all commanders-in-chief and services. For over 6 decades, they've acted as this source. Though there are other military installations in Utah, Dugway is, according to a Deseret Morning News reporter, the single most secretive site in all of Utah. Its isolated physical location is uniquely suited for such alien containment. Dugway is home to the most advanced facilities in the world designed for the containment, storage, and preservation of highly exotic biological material. So if the story is true, then none could deny that the remains of extraterrestrial corpses and body parts would equate to highly exotic biological material. And in that sense, we may very well be seeing a situation with senior personnel at Area 51 and our counterparts at Dugway Proving Ground are secretly sharing materials of the alien variety. Well, we talked in a previous show about Bob Lazar, a man who was unknown one day and then he was on everybody's tongue the next. And undoubtedly, one of his most inflammatory claims was that the UFOs he saw stored and tested out at Area 51's S4 facility were powered by a heavy element not found on Earth. It was known as Element 115. Even within the heart of the UFO research community itself, this particular claim was derided and denounced by well-known ufologists. But a fascinating story suggests that ufologists should not have so rashly wiped their hands of the Element 115 affair. And it's a strange story that at its heart it's about a teenage boy who may have found vindication for Lazar's assertions, and also found himself in scalding hot water when he tried to prove that what Lazar had to say was the absolute truth. You ought to remember, this day and time, sometimes telling the truth can get you in more trouble than lying. The story dates back to 1994, and a man named Matthew Bevan, who at the time was just a teenage boy. Bevan had, and still has, deep interest in two areas: computer hacking and UFOs. Frustrated about the distinct lack of definitive UFO data coming out of the U.S. government, he decided to go and look for the answers himself. And in doing so, he almost found himself in a potential decades-long jail sentence hanging over his head. Knowing that a lot of the tales of crashed UFOs and dead aliens held in the possession of Uncle Sam originated with employees and former retired staff from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, he decided he'd do his utmost to penetrate the heart of the base as a means to try and find the information that he learned to uncover. Incredibly, he achieved exactly what he set out to do on nothing more than an old Commodore Amiga 1200, which was released onto the market in 1992. I had one of those. Well, I can't say it was the most effective computer I ever used, but in doing so, he ensured that the saga of Element 115 was not quite as dead as some many in ufology had assumed. Bevan first hacked various elements of NASA as well as the Rome laboratories at Griffiths Air Force Base in New York, and he did so very successfully. While he didn't find anything of a UFO-themed nature in the files he penetrated, all of this spurred Bevan on chiefly because he had entered the system and had checked out various classified files related to advanced U.S. weapons without being caught, or so he thought. At the time, he delved deeper into UFO lore, reading books and articles on the likes of the legendary UFO crash at Roswell, New Mexico in early July 1947. Several people had the good fortune to interview Bevan. And in his own words from that interview, he said, "I've been interested in computers probably since about the age of 11. I had a ZX81 for my 11th birthday and upgraded several times. Eventually got a Commodore Amiga 1200, which is the one I was using when I hacked Wright-Patterson back in '94. When I first started getting onto the net, I began looking at all the various bulletin boards that were available, again making friends with other users. One guy in Australia had on his bulletin board all these text files about UFOs. This was about 1994. He said he'd never been really interested in UFOs. He'd seen E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind like everybody else, but that was about it. He certainly hadn't read anything in depth on the subject. Had some very interesting files on there, and he pulled down about 500 of them and started getting into it. There was a magazine article called PHRACK that listed a whole host of military bases where people are looking for UFO stuff. Rumors were circulating that a group of hackers who'd found something out about classified but computerized UFO files had gone missing. And if they'd gone missing, maybe they found something, he thought. So he set out to find something himself. He was on the computer for hours at this time. He didn't run up a big telephone bill because a friend had given him a black market program that allowed you to make calls for free. I had one of those once. The way it works is that it uses tones within the computer that fool the telephone exchange into believing that there's nobody using the line. It's called blue boxing. In a nutshell, computer hacking is the art of getting into other people's computer systems without any prior permission. Basically, it is a criminal offense in the majority of countries if you have no permission. It's determined as unauthorized access. To start off with a fairly good idea of computer systems. At the moment, it's very easy for people to do so because there's so many sources on the internet that are very detailed and explicit descriptions about how to actually hack systems. So he got a modem, which he was about 16, and began getting into it a few months later, early 1990s. In 1993, he tried going for universities in the States because he knew they were going to be hacked anyway, and he'd be less likely to be prosecuted for hacking a university and actually be a good experience. See, people often tend to go with the same password for multiple systems, so the chances are if you can access their passwords for one system, that password may work for another system as well. Certainly don't have to sit there and type in hundreds of different passwords till you find the right one. There are actually programs that will do that for you. That'll get you into the system. You literally search millions of words till you find the right one, and then you're in. Now, sometimes at these universities, you'll have a professor maybe doing work for the military as well, maybe using the same password on both systems. For example, he said it only takes a few seconds to find out all about the public accessible files of, say, NASA, which are on the internet. But if you hack a university and find out a particular professor is doing work for NASA and you have his university password, you find out a bit more about the material that isn't publicly accessible. I'm not getting too technical, he said. If we take NASA as an example again, there are publicly available files that NASA puts on the net. But these are, by necessity, connected to additional computers that are part of their inner systems, the classified material, as it were. There have to be computers that are on the front line. As he said, as he got further and further into the system, it became clear that he could eventually have had access to the missiles themselves. When you get onto the frontline computers, once you're into those, you can then worm your way into their inner network. That's why the authorities and agencies always put out a statement saying there's no classified material on the stuff they put on the net. And that is true. They're connected to the classified network as well. And he said before we come to the UFOs, one of the most interesting places they got into was called FLEX, Force Level Execution. This was at Rome Laboratories at Griffiths Air Force Base in New York. The official Air Force line was that this was a program designed to plan a U.S. military strike in the event of war. But there was actually a lot more to it than that. As he got further and further into the system, it became clear he could eventually have had access to the missiles themselves. This system was controlled by the Department of Defense and wasn't public knowledge at the time. Actually still putting the finishing touches on it when he got in. Now, if you can get into that system and get the same access level as the administrator, you can change and delete anything you want to. Well, somewhere along the line, you can change the controlling program and you can gain access to the missiles. It wasn't a case of having a red button on his keyboard, but effectively, if he had to spend a few days working on something and then pressed enter, there's a potential for doing something like launching a missile. Well, he said he began looking at all those files and accounts to see if there was a common thread. And there was the Roswell story, the craft that crashed and which was taken to Wright-Patterson. You had the stealth aircraft being tested by various defense contractors. You had Area 51, where some of those contractors operated from, and where it was also alleged that the U.S. government was storing crashed UFOs. So he's really picking out terms and places and all those stories that seemed important and began to see if he could hack the relevant systems. Well, Wright-Patterson was a very, very easy computer system to get into. There's one account for one machine that wasn't even passworded. Once you're into the system, you've taken it over, you've control of all the files in the system. And there are the special files on the system for people's mail accounts. You can read anybody's email and look at their work. And in a lot of those establishments, you have people who are working on various projects, and in each of their directories, you'll have files regarding what they're working on or developing, and there's generally a flow of email between people which you can access. And now, in one particular system he got into, there was this flow of email back and forth in which there was a discussion about some sort of radical engine that was being developed. People were discussing it in a normal work-type environment. And they were talking about this engine, and you recalled one guy saying, we've managed to sustain Mach 15, and this thing is super fast, which is approximately 11,500 miles per hour. And he said this is part of a discussion that was taking place between people at Wright-Patterson, and there were explicit drawings and diagrams and so on. These files clearly refer to a working prototype of an anti-gravity vehicle to utilize a heavy element to power it. This wasn't a normal aircraft. It was very small, split level, with a reactor at the bottom and room for the crew at the top. Well, that sounds very much like Bob Lazar had been talking about with George Knapp a number of years ago. The split level anti-gravity system and the heavy element, all described by Veblen, easily and eerily mirror the words of Lazar. For Bevan, this was a breakthrough of major proportions. In his mind, he now had vindication of the rumors coming out of Area 51 and S4. Bevan congratulated himself on his skills, but he shouldn't have been so hasty, though. In 1996, Bevan had left school and was working at Admiral Insurance in Cardiff, Wales. One particular day, his world came crashing down around him. He said it was a normal day, and one of the finance managers called down and spoke to someone else about him, asked if he was there and what he was doing. When he got off the phone, I thought I was in trouble, and he said, can you come and have a look at the managing director's computer? Well, he thought there was no problem, so he went off with him to the MD's office, but when they went into the room, all the blinds were down. He looked around the room, said there were 7 or 8 people in the room, all men. There was the finance manager and one of the other managers. There were 5 or 6 people who identified themselves as being from the local police from Scotland Yard. One of them outstretched his hand, and I shook it, and he said, Matthew Bevan? He said, my name is Detective Sergeant Simon James of Scotland Yard's Computer Crimes Unit, and I'm putting you under arrest for hacking NASA, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Lockheed. Well, as you might guess, at this point, Bevan was in very deep water. The split level, craft, the anti-gravity system, and the heavy element, all described by Bevan, mirrored the words of Bob Lazar. And to answer the question of how precisely Scotland Yard succeeded in tracking down Bevan, got to turn our attention to data that had been secured via the American government's Freedom of Information Act. The actions of Bevan are known to have been the subject of at least 3 government reports. The first one, Secured in Cyberspace, written by Dan Gelber and Jim Christie, and presented to the Senate Permanent Subcommittee of Investigations, and 2 General Accounting Office papers written by Jack Brock that extensively detailed his hacking history. The Gelber-Christie paper discussed the hacking activities of Bevan in an 8-page appendix called The Case Study, Rome Laboratory, Griffiths Air Force Base, New York Intrusion. Well, the American departments that were involved in tracking Bevan and were also involved in the investigation of varying degree were the Defense Information Systems Agency. Notified once it became apparent somebody had hacked their way into Rome, and Wright-Patterson and the team from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations at the Air Force Information Warfare Center in San Antonio, Texas. It was led by Air Force computer scientist named Kevin Zeiss. He provided a deposition to Scotland Yard on Bevan that the world of officialdom steadily refuses to place in the public domain. Well, the break-in has been traced to a New York City-based internet provider, Mindvox, and the Air Force has been given permission to monitor all communications on the Rome Labs network. It appears, though, that examining data on the events that the final and positive identification of Bevan came to the AFIWC via, ironically, a network of informants in the hacking community, and not by identifying him directly through his own computer. April 14, 1994, American records show Bevan hacked into the Goddard Space Center system from a server at Latvia and copied data. The Air Force naturally assumed this was a penetration by an unfriendly nation, using Bevan to do some illegal snooping on his behalf. With hindsight, it seems likely, though, that this was simply Bevan's way of covering his tracks. The next day, the AFIWC monitored Bevan entering the systems of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and the countdown to Bevan's subsequent inevitable arrest began. The fact that 2 years went by before any arrest was made is an issue that still remains a puzzle to this day. Well, for those that are not familiar with it, established in 1959, the Goddard Space Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, is NASA's oldest such facility, and it is still involved in a number of programs involving planetary exploration. But you don't hear much publicity about it. Now, Bevan expanded on what happened next. He said, when I was arrested, I was taken to Cardiff Central Police Station and stuck in a cell. When I was taken for the interview, I was persuaded not to have a solicitor present, so I cooperated for the first couple of questions, like, did you hack this computer system? Did you hack that computer system? He said, bear in mind, at that time I was doing the hacking. It was in 1994 or 5, and it was in 1996 when I was arrested. He said, I honestly couldn't remember the exact details, mainly because I'd hacked into literally thousands of systems. So my answers to the police were quite vague, but it wouldn't do to avoidance. Then the police turned their attention to the crux of the matter. Futuristic aircraft that were powered by a super heavy element, just like the one described by Bob Lazar out of Area 51's S-4. He said, in the last 2 interviews I had a solicitor president, and I was asked outright, did you hack Wright-Patterson Air Force Base? He said, well, the password was literally handed to me on a plate. They asked me if I saw anything on the Wright-Patterson computers, and did I download anything? And that's when Detective Sergeant James and his colleague, Mark Morris, asked him if he saw anything on the Wright-Patterson computer. He said, yes, an anti-gravity propulsion system. And at that point, the conversation went along these lines. Did you download any files on the anti-gravity engine? He said, no. He said, are you sure you didn't download anything? And he said, yes, I read everything, but I didn't download it. Well, James and Morris were pushing him on this throughout the interview, the anti-gravity engine, but I continued to tell them the same story, which was the truth. Now, a few months later, there was a hearing at Bow Street Magistrates Court in London. He was out on bail at the time. It turned out that the Americans are now claiming that certain things on the computers he had supposedly hacked had been changed. Solicitor said, fine, show us how things were on the system before Matthew got in and show us how it changed them. And the Americans said no. At the hearing, there was a representative from the U.S. intelligence named Jim Hansen. Basically, he took the stand and said he was there to represent the U.S. government. Defense continued to push for information to back up the claims of the government that he had somehow altered their system, but Hansen simply refused to make anything available to the prosecution or even to the judge. As the hearing continued, the prosecution asked Hansen what the American government thought about his motives regarding his hacking of Wright-Patterson. And Hansen said, we now believe Mr. Bevan had no malicious intentions, and his primary purpose was to uncover information on UFOs. Well, turned out that the Americans' main claim at this point was that certain things on the computer he had hacked had been changed. Well, everybody had a bit of a laugh at that point, but when the prosecution asked, can you confirm if Hangar 18 exists or if it's a myth, Hansen said, I can neither confirm or deny as I'm not in possession of that information. But interesting, Hansen had traveled all the way from the U.S. and he had specific knowledge of his attempts to find out information about Hangar 18. And according to Bevins, all this was going on, there was a guy named Richard Price, went under the hacking name of Data Stream Cowboy, and who was somebody he'd been in touch with on the internet. But they'd never personally met or spoken. But as it turns out, Price and himself have been hacking into the same places. Price eventually got a 1,200-pound fine in March 1997 after he admitted a number of offenses. And these resulted from investigations and penetrations of the Rome Labs computer system. Price pleaded guilty to 12 counts under the Computer Misuse Act and was fined £100 on each charge. As a result, the judge in a later hearing said that, bearing now in mind Price's sentence, he couldn't impose a custodial sentence on him, on Bevan, and really couldn't fine him any more than Price was fined. He told the prosecution, I suggest you think long and hard about this case. Well, in spite of that, the case continued to rumble along, but finally Bevan saw a light at the end of the tunnel. He said, bear in mind that the prosecution had changed her charges from straightforward hacking to hacking with intent to impair the operation of their computer systems. Also, it was estimated that the cost to prosecute him in a full court case would likely be in the order of £10,000 per day. As a result, the prosecution eventually came back and said they weren't going to offer any evidence. The Americans at that point wouldn't make anything available for the judge, the defense, or the prosecution, so they dropped the case. It was November 21st, 1997. Things weren't quite over for Bevins, though. As all this was going on, the Americans stated that somebody who had hacked into their system had actually been from there penetrated the nuclear institute in North Korea. And the worry was the North Koreans believed that it was the Americans doing the hacking when it was really a hacker using their system. And at that point, Bevins began to get a series of funny phone calls. He'd answer the phone, or his wife would answer the phone. The person on the end of the line would hang up. Then he began to get a number of calls from a guy with the Chinese military. He'd get his wife to answer the calls, but when he came to the phone, he'd hang up. Or worse, maybe the Chinese had got wind of the Korean situation. They're either going to get me to work for him or shut me up. It was a very unstable time, he said. But the worry was that the North Koreans believed it was the Americans doing the hacking when it was really a hacker using their system. Well, Bevins and his wife decided to get their phone number changed and applied to British Telecom for a new number. When they sent them a mandate that you sign, it gives you the details of your new number. In the meantime, this Chinese guy phoned again, and his wife said stop phoning, and we were having her number changed. And the Chinese guy said, if you're having it changed and he gave her the new number, don't bother because we already have that. And the Bevins thought, let's move. So he got a new place under an assumed name. In fact, the only person who didn't manage to track him down was a guy from the Daily Mail newspaper, so they moved again. Well, was Bevins of the opinion his daily activities being monitored by both the U.S. and the British at this critical time in his life? He later said it didn't surprise him at all. His barrister, in fact, had gone to court and spoke to the prosecution and told him to stop monitoring his phone calls, and they said they weren't doing it. But the very next day, all the weird clicks and beeps and noises that had been getting on the line suddenly stopped. Bevins said he found that sinister, though, and folks got his number, and he was getting calls from the Chinese military. He was genuinely concerned, and that's why he kept on moving. And Bevan, perhaps, was of the opinion that both British and American authorities still believed, and probably still do, that he had accessed additional data from the Wright-Patterson computer system on the strange anti-gravity heavy element system. Well, what the cops and Jim Hansen didn't know, or maybe they did, was somebody somewhere wanted to know what Bevan had seen on the anti-gravity propulsion engine simply out of worry. If he had been a spy, it would have been even worse. He was told by Scotland Yard if he ever set foot in America, he's going to be arrested on sight. But bearing in mind everything that he went through at the hands of Scotland Yard's computer crimes unit, with the benefit of hindsight, would Bevan still have followed that same course of action? And Bevins later said in answer to that question, yeah, probably. Still left my career, I think. I now had a company called Tiger Commuter Security and run a team of paid hackers. If somebody, banks or finance houses and so on, want to contact us, we'll test their computer security through a brute force attack from outside. And if we get in, we'll tell them how we get in and how to improve their system to prevent hacking from rival businesses and companies and things along those lines. Well, when asked what his ultimate goal as a computer hacker was, he said it was really to try and get hold of the Roswell files, self-satisfaction, and the buzz and adrenaline of hacking a secret system. Nothing more than that. Well, as all of this shows, regardless of the shrill cries of certain elements of ufology in the scientific community, strong evidence does support the claims of Bob Lazar concerning heavy elements, anti-gravity propulsion systems, and a mysterious split-level craft that can fly at extraordinary speeds, all coming out of Area 51. The fact that U.S. intelligence displayed deep concerns about the Bevins affairs is a clear indication that he was at least onto something, and that Scotland Yard had received a classified briefing from U.S. computer scientist Kevin Zeiss, which clearly prompted him to ask questions about that same anti-gravity-based technology. And it's also indicative of the likelihood that somebody somewhere feared if Bevan really did have the goods, then the whole pack of cards might just come tumbling down and Lazar's claims would be vindicated. It wasn't quite along the straight line of that theory. The question was, if the secrets of Area 51 remained secret, but just barely secret, then that story just wasn't quite over with. Well, Whitley Strieber, who was an alien abductee and author of the best-selling book Communion, has a story to tell in many ways, may be connected to this saga. 1993, Strieber, having been given apparently classified information on where the U.S. government's top-secret UFO data could be found, said spooks started prowling around his neighborhood. Business associate was accosted on an airplane by a group of young men who flashed badges, claimed to be with the National Security Agency, and questioned him for hours about his and Strieber's activities. And those same agents were reportedly looking at attempted illegal penetrations of Department of Defense computers. And the fact that DOD was concerned about Strieber and UFOs and hacking in 93, that's the same year that Bevins began his hacking, suggests that one of few people in the government were tracking the links between UFOs and hackers. August 7, 2013, NBC News ran an online article entitled New Super Heavy Element 115 is confirmed. May well have vindicated the claims of what both Lazar and Bevan uncovered. According to NBC, scientists say they've created a handful of atoms of the elusive element 115, which occupies a mysterious corner of the periodic table. Super heavy element's yet to be officially named, but it's temporarily called unum pentium, roughly based on the Latin and Greek words for the digits of its atomic number, 115. Breakthrough was made by GSI Helmholtz Center for Heavy Ion Research in Germany. And when the story broke, New Yorker noted the fact that this was second sighting of the element. Russian scientists have claimed the discovery of element 115 back in 2003, but the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry, chemistry is equivalent of the International Astronomical Union, which famously demoted Pluto from planet status in 2006, wouldn't acknowledge it without a confirming experiment from another team. Helmholtz Center's work must still be reviewed by both the IUPAC and International Union of Pure and Applied Physics. But Unun Pentium is now a step closer to inclusion in the periodic table. If that happens, the International Union will be assigned a permanent official name. Today, element 115 goes by the name of Moscovium. The symbol is MC on the periodic table. Now, none of this proves Bob Lazar was working, although briefly with element 115 30 years ago. But if nothing else, the matter is one that continues to intrigue those who pursue the truth behind Lazar's claims. Ought to be noted, other examples exist of the connection between computer hacking and UFOs, all of which are well worth noting and demonstrate that Bevan was not a lone wolf, which also takes us back to Area 51 of all places. Leonard Stringfield, as a U.S. intelligence officer, served in the Air Force during the Second World War, and after his retirement focused all his spare time looking at the UFO issue, specifically cases of crashed UFOs and dead aliens, Roswell-style events. Over the years and decades, Stringfield cultivated numerous contacts and sources, some anonymous and others who were willing to speak on the record about their knowledge of these crashes. One of those informants was a retired source who worked in U.S. intelligence, and he's told Stringfield of a way that it just might be possible to access the top-secret computerized files held at Wright-Patterson, which is what Matthew Bevan did by targeting the very same installation. According to what Stringfield was told, since the 1948, secret information concerning UFO activity involving U.S. military has been contained in the computer center at Wright-Patterson. At this base, a master computer file is maintained with duplicate support backup files as created at other military installations. As they get the complete dump file, both the master and the support backup files, and you got all the hidden UFO data. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow and talk more about computer hacking and UFOs and secret centers. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.